Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another In the Pit with your host, Lobo Tigre. Our victim of the day is Andrew Williams. He's the president of New Pacific Metals, NUAG. Silver in there is a giveaway in the ticker symbol. Now, I've known this company for a long time. I followed it since inception when Rui Feng started it back after the Silvercorp initial success, and it has reinvented itself several times. So, Andrew, why don't you go ahead and tell us what is New Pacific Metals now? And then I've got questions.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited for our conversation. So, New Pacific Metals, we're an exploration-focused company that is in that transition to a developer. So, we've made three discoveries, all in Bolivia, where our first silver sand project we discovered in early 2019, which has quickly become one of the most globally significant silver discoveries of this past decade. And we put two resource estimates out on the silver sand project and have recently published a PEA study. So that's moving along nicely. And if that weren't a tough enough act to follow, the company has more recently made another major discovery at its Carangas project, also in Bolivia, where we've drilled 80,000 meters now, 189 holes, and we're on the verge of releasing our first ever resource estimate, hopefully in the next couple of months, that we think will showcase a project of similar, if not greater scale than our silver sand project. And finally, we do have a third project that isn't talked about as much just because there's so much going on in the company, but our Silver Strike project, which we released some scout drilling on last year, hitting 200-meter runs at a gram close to surface. So we've got a fantastic exploration team in some phenomenal geology, and we're now in the phase of transitioning two of our three discoveries and moving them down the development track to help create value for shareholders the hard way.
Okay, that's a good elevator speech. You've got me laughing a little bit. Silver Strike, that sounds like a very Bolivian name. But but actually, my first thought was, gee, globally significant silver discovery in the last decade. Is there another one? Like, the silver stories that I'm aware of, they've been around for a while. I can think of some. We won't name any competitors of yours, but they're advancing stories that were already there. But all of these projects, you pick them up with something already there. These aren't, grassroots greenfield discoveries, but you've had, but before we get into the rocks, I have to ask you, I mean, you look like maybe you're old enough to shave. There's a little bit of a 5 o'clock shadow there. I usually like, gray beards and decades of experience in the field. Who are you, and why should I trust you with my money?
Yeah, great question. And you're not the first person that's joked at that. Somebody said to me the other day, hey, you look young, but don't worry, I won't hold that against you. No, in all seriousness, so I've been with the company now for just about today's my 5-month anniversary. I joined January 24th.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And before that, I spent 11 years at a well-known institutional investment firm, Sun Valley Gold, where I progressed up through the years and was a portfolio manager in the latter stages there, and it was able to. I mean, just a phenomenal learning ground and exposure to the industry. Traveled the world. I've been probably close to 100 different mine sites, and got to know most folks in the industry. And it was just I think a tremendous learning ground. Where maybe every it feels like every year you spend in there is worth two, just being exposed to so much. And then, prior to being at Sun Valley Gold, I was spent about 4 years at Deloitte, the well-known accountancy here in Vancouver, as a fresh young auditor, mostly dealing with publicly traded mining companies, our client base, and that's sort of how I got my feet wet in the mining industry, which then has ultimately worked up to where I am today.
All right, so you're an industry guy, and you're in as president. You're not the geological brain behind the discoveries here, I gather. All right. Okay. Fair enough.
I can't take credit. The guys on the ground they're so good, and I'm humbled to be plugged in with such a talented group.
And what's Rui's involvement these days?
Yeah. So Rui, me as president. So my primary responsibilities are on the capital markets. We're a pre-production company, so we always are looking to raise money when the time comes. And then there's the corporate development side, which it should be no surprise that companies or discoveries of the size and scale of ours, track corporate interests. So that's the second piece, and then the third is supporting Rui with strategic initiatives internally. And so, him as CEO, then those are my three buckets, and then he's really the key decision maker and the wise. If I'm maybe the young face, he's the guy that's seen it all before. And so I think we make a really good 1-2 punch and complement each other's skill sets nicely.
Does he still dig into the geology? That's one of the things I remember about him is he wasn't just a CEO up in the C-suite. Like, he'd actually get down with the guy sighting the rigs and give his 2 cents on where to point the things.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I'm convinced he doesn't sleep. I mean, this guy, and he says it himself. He's like, "Hey, I'm how old he is?" But he's like, "I've got the energy of a 30-year-old," and I believe it. I mean, when I came down to Bolivia in January before I joined the company, we visited all 3 of the projects, and Alex Zhang, our VP Exploration, took me to Silver Sand and Carangas. But then, Rui joined us for the Silver Strike trip, and seeing him walk the ground, pound the rocks, and he's in his mind thinking about where things are dipping and striking and saying, hey, we should put a drill hole here, a drill hole here. I mean, he's very much, that's his DNA, right? He's a world-renowned geologist and an entrepreneur at the same time. But yeah, he's still very much full of energy and involved in the right ways.
It sounds familiar. I drove over I don't know how many mountainsides in China with him, and it was like that. But yeah, all right, okay. So you've made some interesting discoveries. I promise we will get to that and talk about the rocks. But first, talk to me about Bolivia. You're going to interest serious money in going to Bolivia, let alone retail investors. And, I understand it's not quite the bad old days, but the last time I was in Bolivia, I kid you not, the last time I was in the country, the company I was with, we won't name them, took me into the ministry, and the minister told me, yes, we're socialists, but we're not going to nationalize things the way they used to do. And not 6 months later, there goes Southern Silver or whatever it was. It was less than a year where the guy looked me in the eye and says, we're not nationalizing anything, and then they did. So maybe I'm a worst case scenario. So hit me with it. How do you convince some guy like me who's been burned by Bolivia to put a penny at risk there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a real question. I think I think you have to take a bit of a long-term view of the mining industry, and you look at several of these jurisdictions. Like, I mean, if you go back in time, countries like, say, Mexico or Chile, I mean, they went through waves like that, many decades ago, and then the politics change and a window opens up, and then all of a sudden, the pendulum swings the other way, and a country becomes all of a sudden hospitable and welcoming to foreign investment. And I think that's the lens that we need to look at Bolivia through, is that, yes, it went through this reset with Evo Morales in 2005, where the country decisively swung to the left. But that was 2005. That's 18 years ago. We're now on our not second, but third.
You're making me feel old. Yeah, that's true. Wow.
And we're now on our third president since then, and so as what happens in some of these countries, when the pendulum swings, the dust kicks up, and then eventually it settles. And I think a real classic example that I point to as a source of inspiration for me, but as a young analyst, when I was in my days on the buy side, I remember 2014. When Lundin Gold came through and went back into Ecuador right after the Ecuadorian government kicked around Aurelian and then subsequently Kinross, and it was like, whoa, this is not a place that anybody should put $1, and that same sentiment prevailed, and yet here was the Lundin Group looking to take a bet that, hey, the dust appears to have settled and it looks like a window's opening here, and so they came in and were able to put their heads down and permit and finance and build the Fruta del Norte mine, world-class ore body. And it's been a great success story. And I look at Bolivia today, and yes, there is that history there. But at the same time, the country, the last real wave of foreign investment in Bolivia came in the 2000s. And there were 3 just fantastic mines quietly in the background that were built and have really operated almost uninterrupted, being the San Cristobal operation, the biggest Sumitomo, formerly Sumitomo's 50,000 ton a day monster, one of the biggest zinc mines in the world with big silver byproduct credits. Pan American Silver has been there for 20 years, San Vicente, and then Core Mining, which is now Andean Precious Metals or San Bartolomé. Like, those are great mines that really quietly operated very well for their respective owners. And but these mines don't last forever, and that's I think one of the dirty little secrets of our industry is that depletion is real, and many of these mines are getting in the top of the seventh, bottom of the eighth innings of their lives, and this is a country that desperately needs new sources of foreign investment. I think it's been well publicized in the news that Bolivia's fiscal position is really challenging. They've maintained a peg against the U.S. dollar now since whatever the last 10, 15 years, but that's come at a great cost, and it appears that that's no longer sustainable. So they really do need to bring in new sources of foreign investment into the country, and probably the most compelling piece of evidence of that so far is this recent $1 billion lithium development deal that was signed with CATL, the Chinese firm, to develop the Salar de Uyuni lithium reserve, which for decades that was always known. It wasn't like the Salar was a new lithium discovery; it was just deemed politically impossible. And now in 2023, given this external backdrop, we are seeing we see that deal, which is great for the country as far as bringing in new sources of investment, and I think an outward signal that, hey, this socialist experiment, it's like what Margaret Thatcher says, right? Socialism's great till you run out of other people's money to spend, and at some point, right, you need to bring in new sources of investment. I think that's very much the window that we find ourselves in here in Bolivia today, and I think we're blessed to have two, between silver sand and Carangas, two fabulous discoveries right on the forefront of this country that we think is opening up.
Well, I see the intellectual case. If they're looking at a fiscal cliff and the big old mines are long in the tooth, then sanity would suggest that they ought to allow investment to be welcome for new ones to replace them. So, but politicians are not always logical. But it's interesting, though, that you bring up the lithium story, because that gives us a litmus test. If they are able to proceed unmolested, and I know a lot of people in lithium space that are, like expecting no production. I mean, Bolivia has the largest lithium reserves in the world and no production. So if that can actually proceed, then yeah, I can see that being useful data to investors. Okay, yeah. All right, let's set that aside. Okay, I hear you. I'm not sure I'm entirely convinced, but I hear you. It gives me something to look for. So Silver Sands, I mean, you went in, as I understand it, looking for one thing and found something else almost perfectly pit-shaped. I mean, talk to me about this discovery. How did that happen? And are you done yet and now advancing towards development, or is it still wide open, or where do we go from here?
Yeah, so I mean, that property was acquired 2017. I think the previous owner had, I think it was like 8 drill holes into it or something like that, and it had some really interesting indications of silver mineralization. And our geologists, when they took a look at it, kind of looked at the core and looked at the broader geological landscape and did some extrapolation calculations and thought, holy smokes, this could be a big system. I mean, this was one that was previously mined in the 1500s. And it was funny because the great Cerro Rico discovery was made 1545, which really, no joke, changed the world. But when that discovery made, it was like tools down at our silver sand project and off to Cerro Rico for the next 500 years. And they were really mining some more discrete narrow high-grade veins, and there was this idea that there was a bulk halo hosted in this fracture network that could be a potential open pittable type project. And so that's exactly the thesis that the company was launched on. And soon enough, I think it was several holes into the program where it was like, okay, we're onto something here. And we've now at the Silver Sand project drilled 136,000 meters of core, 550 holes, and it's now morphed into this 200 million ounce measured and indicated silver resource that's 116 grams per ton, roughly 1.5 grams gold. Comes right to surface, open pittable, roughly 3.5 to 1 strip ratio. And we've got you talk about what's more to give. On our board is the renowned silver geologist Peter McGaw, and every time we talk about, hey, could Carangus be bigger than what silver sand is, he says, wait, you got to qualify that. Silver sand as we know it today. He still thinks very much that what we found, this fracture network close to surface, is really a distal expression of a much higher grade and potentially deeper.
That's classic Peter. There's got to be a source for this down here. Let's do some deep drilling to see where this came from.
Yeah, so that's the dream, and it's geologically plausible. However, just given where we are in our development stage, and we put the drills down there, I think as of November 2022. We've done all the infilling. There's areas of the deposit we've drilled to 5 by 5 meter spacing. I mean, we understand this system very well. So really our task at Silver Sand in this year is on upgrading our PEA study to a PFS, which is well underway, and it looks like we'll be able to get that done by the end of this year. And then we're also moving forward on our permitting process, which is those are really the two key objectives for us to ultimately take this abstract idea of a discovery and turn it into a tangible mine. Those are the two key milestones for us.
I realize I just have to take you at your word for this, but on the permitting front, I mean, up and down Latin America, there's been a major political shift, I perceive, and the hotspot is really big open pit projects. A narrow underground mine with a relatively modest footprint on the surface is less of a hot potato these days. But you're going to make a great big hole in the ground, maybe disappear a mountain on the way. This gets a lot of attention, and even pro-mining places like Chile and Peru, that's the magnet for opposition. Can you talk to how your social license looks around a project like this?
Yeah, so I think one of the points you made is that Bolivia is a mining country like the other ones you mentioned. So when it comes to socializing with the local communities, we're not having the philosophical, hey, is mining welcome in our country? I mean, it's been there for 500 years, 35 kilometers as the crow flies from our project. So that's a big tailwind for us. However, that being said, the most important thing is getting the social license, and that's something that is true for any project. I think it's maybe more true in Latin America, and I wouldn't say it's any more or less acute than in whether it's Chile, Mexico, Peru, even Canada for that matter. It's really about getting the locals on side. So that's very much what we're focused on. And so we've got there's really two main communities on our project. One's got 47 members, the other's got 80. When we started, there was maybe in the first community where there's now 47, there's 4 of them. So as any new discovery, you get that influx, which is on the one hand, it's unfortunate because it's more expensive, but on the other hand, it's also signaling the locals understanding that there will be a deal that will get made at some point, which is encouraging, and I think it's a real signal of their willingness to negotiate. So we're just still in the process right now of we've got our baseline data collection, which is I think that's well underway. Environmentally, I mean, this project, when you look at what projects get real opposition, I'd say 9 out of 10 of them, it's because of the water. And that's something that we're really blessed with because we're going to be capturing excess rainwater that otherwise doesn't get used. There's a big wet season where you get all this rain that comes in and then it ends up flowing to the ocean and then it's bone dry 9 months of the year. So we're going to capture all that water to use in our process plant, and we'll be able to release excess water to the local communities during the dry season. So it's like that water issue is like off the table. I mean, this is probably a rare example of a project that could have a positive net impact on the water availability. So between that and the mining culture, there certainly is a foundation there for us to continue to make headway. And so really what we need to do tangibly is we need to finalize our surface lease agreements with these communities. That's really the big thing. And then relocation. There's about let's call it like 80 families or so, or homes, I should say. Many of them don't even live in the area that would need to be relocated. And then there's also 6 small-scale artisanal miners on the project that have been there for the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, that we ultimately, we're going to find them new homes. And we've got some satellite discoveries in and around our project that are going to be a part of a long-term sustainable solution. So there's still a decent amount of work for us to go on the ground, but we've got a great team, and that we're continuing to, as I say, you just got to get on the ground, chew cocoa leaves with the locals, and build that relationship, because that relationship is ultimately the foundation of any agreement that we're hopefully going to sign here.
All right, sounds good. And before we move on, then, so the PFS is the main focus, but to be clear, are we also doing exploration drilling this year? And if so, no, just the PFS there?
Not at Silver Sand this year. No,
okay.
We've got critical mass, and the idea is that again, we're not cash flowing, and any additional hole we drill is dilution to our shareholders.
That was a trick question. I'm glad to hear that. Peter can cry into his beer about his deep target, but I'm glad you're not spending money on that right now. Okay, over then at Carangas, talk to us about what's happening there, and what do we look forward to for news flow this year?
Yeah, so I think Carangas has flown under the radar here over the last 2 years. So I guess initially, the guys started drilling at Carangas in the middle of 2021, and there's a west dome, which is about 200-300 meters above surface, a little mountain where there's outcropping silver mineralization that Battle Mountain actually drilled in the mid 90s. They drilled roughly 10 holes, hit 100 meters, 100 grams silver, and silver's at $5 an ounce. They walked away, and we're the first company to come in and drill it since. So we initially confirmed those holes on the west dome, and then but a kilometer away, there's another mountain, aptly named the East Dome, to the east, about 1,000 meters. And so we drilled some shallow silver mineralization there, hit it. So we had 2 data points a kilometer apart. And then in the Central Valley, there's 35 to 40 meters of post-mineral cover. So there's nothing obvious about having mineralization underneath there. And so what we did is we drilled, again, shallow angle holes in the Central Valley and hit this broad silver mineralization, so connected it all up for a kilometer's worth of strike. And then it wasn't until hole 31 where our geologists had an idea that there was potentially some interesting alteration occurring at depth in the Central Valley. And so it was, instead of these 45-degree angles that we traditionally drilled, it was hole 31, we drilled a 66-degree dip angle into the Central Valley, and that's where we made the gold zone discovery. So it's really like a chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the discovery. Chapter 1 being the broad silver mineralization that's shallow in the top 200 meters of the deposit, and then this chapter 2 was this gold zone at depth. And so
and sorry, why are we drilling from the sides? Do you not have access to the middle, or is that overburden difficult to get through?
Yeah, no, sorry. So we were drilling in the Central Valley as well, these shallow holes.
Okay.
But it was up until hole 30 where that was really the focus. Like, hey, we found an awesome 200-meter silver horizon with substantial zinc and lead byproduct credits. That could be potentially a mine in and of itself. But we had the idea that if we drill at depth in the Central Valley, where there is a distinctive footprint, that's where we made the gold discovery. And that's really, I think, so now what we've got is this gold system at depth, and then it kind of mushrooms out into the top 200 meters into this extensive silver mineralization. So we've now drilled 80,000 meters, 189 holes, and are on the verge of releasing our inaugural resource estimate, which we think that if you just look at our cross sections and long sections and back of the envelope, like just the silver horizon alone could rival or even exceed what we found at Silver Sand. And then we've got this gold system at depth, which is I don't know, I won't name numbers because they're not released yet, but meaningful. And so I think the other interesting thing, so we've got that resource coming out in July, and then it's important to note as well, like it's not just a resource that makes a mine. There's a whole bunch of other things that need to come into play. One of them being the geometry, right? Looking at that top 200 meters in that extensive zone with a big wide pit, and then you can effectively pre-strip the gold at depth for the second half of the mine life. So strip ratio wise, it appears that we've got some nice tailwinds there. And then finally, the metallurgy. We ran some fatal flaw metallurgical tests early in the drill campaign, and we got 98.5% recoveries of the gold in the bottle roll test, and flotation recoveries in the fresh We got 96 to 99% recovery. So metallurgically, and really we found no trace elements of like antimony, lead, any of that stuff. Like metallurgically, it looks.
Wait, no lead?
Sorry, no. What did I say? No antimony, mercury, or arsenic, like the bad ones. There is lead. We've got in that silver horizon, and thanks for catching it. In that silver horizon, there's about a 1% combined zinc and lead byproduct credit. Probably 2/3 of that 1% would be zinc, and then the balance being lead. But yeah, I think
yeah, that makes more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's just the geometry-wise, just if you looked at it objectively, looks encouraging. Metallurgically speaking, also very encouraging. I think last but not least, you can see it in our recent disclosures and corporate presentation, is we ran an updated IP survey, which was focused on, I think it was 400 meters below surface, because again, the Central Valley, the goal was a blind discovery, and we found 5 different anomalies throughout the district, and one of them perfect, if you then overlay the drilling with our discovery, one of them perfectly overlays this mineralized rhyolite intrusive that hosts our Corangus discovery. And so there's a few other anomalies there that we look to hope in the second half of this year drill and prove out, and potentially, if we can dream big, the idea that this is one of several in a district.
Sounds good. I love those kind of discoveries that are, not outcropping on surface. It's based on a geological theory, and then you test it, and boom. I hope the guys who came up with that got a whack of options, or something more than a cigar anyway.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So what's the work plan this year? We've got a resource coming out, and then still wide open. We're still exploring, or are we moving ahead towards economics here, or where are we going from here?
Yeah, so resource July, and then I think second half of the year we'll approve some drilling for those geophysical anomalies, and then post the resource as well. There will be, I guess, we'll get input from our QP on recommended next steps. So maybe there's just some additional bits and pieces that we may need to infill within that existing footprint. But I think really the next step is to hand it off to the engineers and start looking at PEA designs and a PEA study, which I think our stretch target is to put something out by year end, but maybe that bleeds into next year. But I think that what we learned at Silver Sand is that from the 2 resources up until January of this year, when we released our PEA study, it really gave us a lot more to talk to about the direct impacts of the project for our community and government relations efforts. It's been really helpful for us to have that document. So I think we want to get there as soon as we can at Corangus, and so we're going to hopefully be rolling that resource into a PEA study, if not by year end, early next year.
Well, if it's just a PEA, that it shouldn't require too much more.
It depends. It's funny. One of our directors is kind of like, you could put a PEA out, but early, but it won't have a lot of rigor or merit to it. And I think our guys are proud, and I know all CEOs will say this, that our PEA is a high quality PEA, but I do feel like our Silver Sand PEA was in a reasonable level of detail with lots of drilling and test work behind it. Like our PEA was done almost entirely on measured and indicated resources. And so I think we'd like to, as a company, that's our style, is to do things high quality. Right?
Sure. And you have a bird in hand already, so you have time to do this. If this was your first project of merit, and people weren't sure, it's Bolivia, all this stuff, I might argue harder for pushing to get something out there, just to give people an idea. Like, here's our market cap, here's what our flagship project is worth, and we're growing from here. That might help clarify the value proposition, but you don't need to do that. You've already got something else. But okay, our 2 most advanced projects, the more solid projects, are going into the boring engineering phase, it sounds like. So this makes Silver Strike more interesting. Presumably that's where your exploration excitement might be forthcoming. So what are we doing there?
Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of excitement at Corangus this year. Like, we still haven't put out our Q1 drill program. Like, we drilled with 5 rigs in Q1, and so we haven't yet put those out to the market. We've just
But the drilling is done. You just haven't got all the assays in?
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
and then the resource we think is also a really exciting milestone for us. And then in the second half of this year, potentially drilling these geophysical anomalies. So there's still
Okay.
lots of
All right.
excitement.
All right. Fair
I guess
enough.
I would say that the focus for us is really, how do we, inject some sizzle next year, looking at 2024, and that's probably where Silver Strike will enter the fold. So early this year, we drilled 5,000 meters at Silver Strike. Like I said, there's instance where we hit 200-meter runs at a gram right at surface, oxidized gold. But to be honest, we were getting no recognition for it in our share price. So that was kind of point number one. It's like we're spending the risk capital, and many of us are shareholders. We're getting no reward for it. And then I think number two is just bandwidth wise. I'd say, like you said earlier, most junior companies, they maybe have one main project that they're advancing, and the whole company is focused in on that singular objective. Well, we've got two big projects that we're moving forward, and so from a bandwidth perspective, it made sense for us this year to hit the pause button on Silver Strike drilling. It's not going anywhere. It's still there. The geological potential is real, but this year we're taking a breather at Silver Strike, and then perhaps next year we'll be in a better position to resume drilling there. But I mean, it's a huge land package. It's 40 something square kilometers. It was historically drilled by Rio Tinto in the 90s. There's mineralized dumps littered all throughout the project from artisanal mining. I mean, it's just a classic setup, and our geologists have identified both silver sand and Carangus types of geology on the ground. So it's actually not a bad idea to take it a little bit slower, because you can blow your brains out drilling something, and that's how you really rack up the bills as a junior is by undisciplined drilling. And I think again the DNA of our company is we've been very disciplined with the drill bit, very high success rate, and so we want to make sure that we're well positioned from an internal bandwidth perspective, as well as maybe the market will hopefully be more receptive in some point in the future, where we actually can reward our shareholders for the discoveries that we've been making. So 2023, we're going to pause that, but maybe next year, as the beauty of having a portfolio, right? If one or two of these projects go into the engineering phase that doesn't exactly generate the excitement, we can turn the dial up at Silver Strike. And I also should mention that part of I think what makes us special is that we're really the first ones to come back into Bolivia. Now there's, I don't know, half a dozen new juniors buzzing around the country, but before then it was just us, and so we were able to assemble a fantastic team in the country that's well connected, and we've got active guys roaming the country and looking for the next silver sand, the next Carangus, or the next Silver Strike. So we've also got active project generation, and who knows, maybe next year we'll have a new project to talk about. So I don't think there's really any danger of us descending into the base of the Lassonde curve, just given a strong portfolio here.
I get it. All right, but so there are no more results pending from Silver Strike. It's done from now. So
Yeah.
the deliverables for this year are PFS at Silver Sands, resource and maybe PEA at Carangas, and pending drill results from Q1 already done.
That's right. Yeah, and then getting back in and drilling some of these geophysical anomalies at Carangus.
And that would be this year, later this year?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a potential here for us in the second half of the year to get back in there, drill a couple holes in each of them, and.
Well, yeah, it occurs to me. I mean, with the southern hemisphere having the opposite winters, you're going into winter now, so waiting until afterwards would make sense perhaps anyway. But I don't know. What are the elevations for these projects, and do you have that high altitude issue with either of them?
Not really. I mean, like Silver Sands at 3,900 meters, and Carangus is almost close to 4,000, which is high, but
That's pretty high.
Yeah, but as far as we just hosted a group of investors and analysts to site a couple weeks ago, and
Nobody passed out?
Nobody passed out. No.
Well, 4,000 is manageable. It's high enough that'll make a difference to the equipment you choose and all that. But 4,500 is where it really starts getting harder to breathe, and 5,000 is just, man.
I will say, even a young guy such as myself, like even my blood pressure was noticeably higher from the elevation at 3,900 meters. I think the doctor there was a little bit spooked, but apparently it's normal for at that elevation, your blood pressure does go up. But as far as operationally, after a few days, I was in the gym in the morning, working out and getting some exercise. So
You went to the gym at 3,900 meters?
Well, we've got a makeshift gym at our camp. Yeah.
Oh man, you're insane. I'm not buying this stuff. Actually, I saw, where was this? Oh, the years blur. But I saw a camp high in the Andes, and it was plus 4,000 meters, and I don't remember which one it was, but it was. And the guys had a gym set up there, and they had a basketball court. This was 4,500 meters, and this was with Fortuna Silver in Peru. And the base camp at Cayoma, the Cayoma mine, had a basketball court, soccer court, and some guys had some makeshift weights and stuff. And I'm breathing like Darth Vader just to sit down and have a cup of tea. And these miners are running around after their shift, after their however many hours shift, hauling drill core and doing all that stuff. And they're working out and playing basketball. It's like, whoa. All right. Anyway, okay. So, all right, we'll give you, you get a pass on that for youth, I suppose. All right. How much is this going to cost, and how much do you have in the bank? I'm pretty sure you're well funded, but what are the numbers there?
Yeah, so we had at the end of March cash and investments of 11 million US, which is enough to cover our work plans for the balance of this year. And then going forward, we will need to complete a modest top up in order to get sufficient funds to get either or both of Silver Sand and Corangus across the line up to the point where we can ultimately do the big construction financing. So yeah, 11 million fully funded for this year, but we probably don't want to wait until the tank's on fumes to go back and raise a little bit more capital. So at some point here, we'll need to complete that modest top up. But given our strong shareholder base, we don't, in all the discussions and marketings I've been doing since joining the company, I don't see that as being a problem.
Yeah, for those evil bastards out there waiting for you to finance and buy at a lower price, you're clearly not going to do it before you have some more news out. So maybe they should think twice about it. Okay, all right. All right. Well, those were the questions I had at the top of my mind. I have been following the story. It is interesting. The political risk has long been my main hang-up, and I'll have to think about that. You gave us a litmus test. I will think about that. The other question I always ask everybody is the skin in the game question. If you want me to risk my own hard-earned money on this, how much of yours have you put into the deal?
Yeah. So just before I get that, I want to just, again, you brought up the political risk again. I just one thought to leave you with before I talk about skin in the game is when you think about risk as an investor in the mining industry, that's permanently losing your capital. And this idea that if you just go to the safe jurisdictions, you take that off the table. But I think if you just look at the reality in our industry, what often happens is you stay in those jurisdictions, you end up taking on an extraordinary amount of technical risk, and you end up going into projects that are inherently riskier. And that's like you look at, okay, where have investors been wiped out in the last several years? It's okay, underground gold mining in Ontario, or building the old pit gold mines in Ontario.
Or never mind investors. Your company, good sir, I think from before your time had projects in Canada, so actually when you were talking about, the company's DNA and wanting to proceed cautiously, that was what came to my mind. Like, Rui's been burned on this before. And so going after something, in a more methodical way, and I know Rui's told me, like, political risk, tell me about political risk. I got burned in Canada. I don't want to hear about Bolivia. Sorry, I'm not supposed to be helping you. But I'm remembering this particular story has its own adventures with political risk.
Yeah.
I was going to let you have the last word after asking you the skin in the game question, but go ahead.
Yeah, and so you look at, Mark Bristow says geology trumps geography, and many of the success stories in our industry have been going and following phenomenal world-class geology in less traditional jurisdictions, whether it's, I talked about Lundin Gold, B2 Gold, Barrick Randgold, West African Resources, Endeavour Mining. These are that's really been the strategy of these companies is find great geology and then surround it with a team of great people, and then adapt to the local environment, and it's actually a tried and true recipe. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, right? Operating in these jurisdictions is more complex, but for those that are willing to make it work and are able to make it work, the rewards can be compelling. So that's just I think the framework that as an investor in the sector, it's like, if you're going to go to these jurisdictions, you better make sure you've got the geology to make it worth your while. And I think that's where, from my perspective, is really New Pacific's. It hits that threshold here. That's my last word on the.
That's certainly what Friedland would say.
Right, exactly. And then your question about skin in the game, great question. And so, so when I joined the company, again, coming from the buy side, that was a big theme, is skin in the game. Do you have skin in the game? And I felt it was important, and not just in recognition of the value I saw in the company, but myself, just the principle of having skin in the game. I wrote a $250,000 check of my own money into the company when I first joined, and like you said, I'm a young guy here. I got a 2-year-old and a mortgage. It's not like buying a cup of coffee for me, which it can be for some folks. So I'm certainly well invested in this. And then Rui, he owns management insiders own collectively 9% of this company, and Rui 7% of that. And so he's like I said, still very involved in this and cares deeply about the success of the company. So between Rui and the rest of the senior management team and myself, we're very much aligned with shareholders and incentivized to make this work.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. A $250,000 check is certainly much better than a $250,000 in free options that you got for signing up. Okay, hat tip for that. Okay, well, I've asked some pretty obnoxious questions, so if there's anything else you do want to leave our audience with, I will let you have the last word here.
Yeah, just firstly, thank you for hosting me. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was fun. But I just encourage folks to have a look at us, go on our website, Silver Sand, Corangus, look at, and just think about how rare it is for a junior to be making a true grassroots discovery the old-fashioned way. You get maybe 1 or 0 of these every single year in our industry. It's not like the 90s and the 2000s where it seemed like discoveries were being made all the time. There's just not many of them to go around anymore. And for us to have made 2 in a short amount of time between Silver Sand and Corangus, and potentially a third at Silver Strike, we've really got those raw ingredients that are necessary for any junior to be successful, which is a real discovery. And so we're at the point now we're gonna keep drilling, and we're gonna keep the news flow going, but we're also gonna put our heads down now and get the hard work done to bring these projects across the line and build real mines, which is either you find new mines by the drill bit, or you develop new mines that have been discovered. Those are really the 2 key ways to build value in this business, and I think we're set up to do both.
All right, Andrew Williams, President, New Pacific Metals. Thank you very much. Good luck, and keep us posted.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for watching this edition of In the Pit with Lobo Tigre. If you enjoyed or found value in what you just saw, and you're watching this on any sort of social media, please do hit the like button and the share link. Send this on to anybody you think might be interested. That helps us out a lot. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do hit the subscribe button as well. The number of subscribers helps us get more valuable content to you as well. On the subject of subscribing, I'll quickly say that if you're not a subscriber to our free weekly Speculators Digest, I encourage you to sign up. I promise if you do, we will not send you a flood of daily advertisements. You get 1 free weekly digest with original research not published anywhere else. Check it out at independentspeculator.com. Thank you and have a great day.